Hey everyone, Dockwell here, and welcome to another video. Today's video is the offlane tier list for patch 7.35d. But before we get into the video, I just want to let you guys know that I'm doing replay reviews on stream every Saturday night at 8 p.m. Eastern Time on Twitch, which is linked down below in the description. If you're a newer player or a player basically below 4K MMR and you want me to review one of your replays and give you advice, you can go to my Patreon down below in the description and sign up, or you can just go to my Twitch and subscribe there. Every supporter can request at least one replay every month, and I'll also be playing games with the community on those streams as well. So I hope to see you guys there, and with that out of the way, let's get back to the video. So like I said in the other videos, this patch is probably going to be around for a while now because they didn't release that 7.36 unfortunately, so who knows if the next patch comes in like a month or two, if we'll get the big patch with the new hero, or if we'll just get like a letter patch again, like the E patch or something in a couple weeks. I don't think they'll release it in the middle of ESL, but who knows with Valve, you know, you just never know these days. But let's just jump in, and the first hero in our S tier is going to be Slardar. And if you've played much Dota here recently, you probably see Slardar all the time because this hero is very popular right now, and I think there's a couple reasons for that. The first is that people have realized that Orchid is actually really good on the hero because it gives you attack speed and it scales into even more attack speed later when you upgrade it into Bloodthorn, which is really good for the hero. And obviously that just helps with your right click ability in general because that's kind of what the hero wants to do, other than just like, you know, stunning people and those kinds of things. Like anything that kind of has dual purpose is really good. And you also need some mana regen, which is great, which is why the other item is Echo Saber that you buy, and that's really good if you just feel like it's a very, very bad game for silences, like everyone's buying Manta or everyone has Dispel. So there's just so many things that are just not going to be worth buying that Orchid. You can also go that route. So having multiple item builds that are still pretty good and can make you really aggressive and be super annoying to supports or like solo kill cores with that Orchid and that kind of stuff, it just benefits the hero greatly. And then one of the other things that has happened recently in the past like 6 or so months is that this hero can now clear waves with his stun, and that doesn't really happen until later in the game, until you get your shard and even until you get level 20. But for the most part, you are way better at farming than you used to be, because in the past this hero really would just have to right click everything. It would take forever, you wouldn't really jungle, you wouldn't really clear through waves. But now if you can get that shard pretty early, if you can max out your stun, you will just clear through waves much quicker. You're better at pushing, and so you're better at getting farm. And this hero with like 4 items is kind of insane. Like, you know, if you get BKB, if you get Ags, if you get some damage items, like you just do insane amounts of damage, and you're so hard to bring down. And you just have that added benefit of just like amping up damage for the rest of your team when you just when you use your ult on somebody. And then if you hit 25, it's undispellable. You can also take Roche super fast. So it does a little bit of everything, especially now that it's able to farm, because one of the biggest things, I think the biggest downside for the hero was the fact that it couldn't farm. So now that they made him able to farm, which seems to be happening with a lot of different heroes, you know, they get that thing that they have been lacking for a long time. Now that this hero has that, it's very good. It's also a great patch for it, just with matchup wise. So that's Slardar. That's the long and short of it. Very good hero right now. And then the next hero in S tier, still here, even despite some nerfs and stuff like that, it's been around for a while now, is Centaur. This hero is just pretty much good because the stomp was changed, it's way more reliable, and now your double edge with Shard and with the Shivas, which is the main build on the hero, is still very good, still doing a lot of damage. And I think the thing that was the focus of the hero, which is the return, is just not really, it's kind of just a bonus now. Like you don't really skill it as much as you used to. You kind of go for a lot of the other stuff. I mean, you can skill it if you need to, but really the thing about the hero is it's just super stable. Like the Lane Sage is stable. You're going to get your farm. You're going to get super tanky, and you're going to dish out a decent amount of damage and be very annoying to deal with. And people actually have to kind of see that you're doing damage, and like you can come in, kill supports. You can be very annoying for the enemy by like doing a ton of damage off like low cooldown to their cores as well. So it's not just that you're this tanky annoying guy that stuns people and doesn't do any damage. Like they have to deal with you, and that's kind of the thing that makes this hero good right now. But it's not personally my favorite hero because it's just kind of boring. Like he's just reliable. You can do what you can do. And yes, if you don't really know how to play offlane, you don't have like a good offlaner to pick right now, just pick Centaur because he's very reliable. But because of that, he's kind of boring to me, and that's just my personal opinion. But I can't deny that he is fairly good, and people are picking him. He has a great win rate. He has a good pick rate. Then next we have Dragon Knight. This hero is just, despite some of the nerfs, it's still just reliable and good, and people are picking it in pros all the time. Now, I personally don't think it's as good as it used to be, and that's just, I mean, that's just a fact. Like, the ult with Ags and stuff was nerfed. Its main build, which was going for this Mage Slayer, that was nerfed. but it's still generally reliable because you have the stun, you have the wave clear, you can build the manta, you can get your ags, and even though ags is not as good as it once was, it's still very good. Like, the numbers got nerfed a little bit, but still, once you get to that spot in the game, you're still just insanely tanky, doing a lot of damage and very annoying to deal with, and you can just push towers pretty much just as fast as always. And so I think that's pretty much why this hero is still getting picked, is because there are some maybe other offlaners that you might want instead of in other positions, like instead of DK, but DK is just really good overall. I still think it's one of those that you would want to pick if you want kind of this right clicker, but also has some offlane potential. Like, there's still stuns and tankiness and things like that, but you are more of a right clicker than some of the other heroes, which are more spell based or like team fight based. That's not really DK. But you do have to be careful sometimes, because you can get like hard countered in lane sometimes. You can have games where you just aren't able to farm those items, and so you do have to be careful. But if you are able to farm those items and get to those timings and have a good lane, you're going to just absolutely destroy. Then next and last for S tier, we have Brewmaster. This hero is just really, really good. I think it's been good for a while. The thing is, it is a specialist hero. I wouldn't really call it cheese, but you need to know how to play the hero, how to micro, how to take advantage of all the different aspects of the hero. You need to know how to kill people early, use all the spells and the time that it takes for his ult to run out. Like, you need to be using all of the damage that you can get out, like maximize that in that duration. You need to know how to take advantage of late game to push. You need to know how to get your ult off and be effective in team fights, all that kind of stuff. It's really a high skill cap hero, but if you can practice it, if you can get good at it, it is very, very good right now. And I think the added benefit is that it doesn't need the ult necessarily to be good. Like, you can have a great laning stage before your ult. Like, you're not just going to get destroyed in the lane. You can also like push towers and threaten without the ult, like, or with the ult off cooldown. Like, you can threaten it and you can maybe press it, but you don't have to press it. It's not just like your other spells are completely useless right now. And that's, I think, what makes this hero so strong. Then before we move on to A tier, I will say this: don't pick this hero below like 5k or something. This Darkseer hero is pretty good right now. It's kind of on the upswing. I think if I was going to put it over here, I'd probably put it in A, but I just don't love the hero in general unless you are a high MMR player, because I just think there's so many things about it that just don't you don't play Dota in the same way. I've said this a million times when I talk about the hero, but you give up free lanes to the enemy. You really need to have a good 4 position on your team that knows how to take advantage of your hero in order to win the lane. That doesn't always happen, so you're just kind of doing nothing for the longest time, it feels like. And then because of that, you just are farming, and yes, you're hoping on the late game, which does happen, but that just feels awkward. It's very team-based and stuff like that, and you're just kind of AFK pushing with your shield. And then moving on, we have the A tier, and the first one in the A tier is Mars. And Mars was kind of out of the meta for a long time. Like, he was probably D tier, C tier. Like, his win rate was very, very bad. And then he kind of came back into the meta with the Divine Rapier and Revenant's Brooch combo, which made you just like crit for insane damage and like delete people, like basically one-shot people. And so with that, he like popped all the way up to S tier. People were going like Divine Rapier, like second, third item on the hero, and it was even happening in pro games. And then they completely like nerfed that. They took that away. They changed Divine Rapier, and they also, because there was like spell amp on it too, which helped Mars. And then they also made it so you can't crit on Revenant's Brooch. But despite that, he still kind of is very popular. He's just one of those heroes, sort of like Pudge in a way, where people just love to play him because of his utility, kind of like Pango in the similar kind of way, where the innate kit is just pretty good, but the win rate is kind of bad because people just like pick him all the time, even if they're not very good at him. So I still think that he is, decent. He's still getting picked a lot. His win rate's not the best. That's why I'm putting him in A tier, because it's just right there where he's kind of on the downtrend. We'll see if in the future with the next patches or whatever, if he falls to B or C tier, or if he stays up here in A tier, because I still think he's pretty good. I mean, he's a generally decent hero, with a lot of these heroes going for farming builds and like farming mid lanes, farming off lanes, farming 4 positions. If you can just have one hero like a Mars that just has this big team fight ultimate, and he can do some damage as well if he gets farm, I mean, that's pretty good. That's not bad. You can always like secure all the team fight you need with this one hero, which can be pretty good. So that's Mars. Then we have Timbersaw. This hero is still pretty good. It's not as good as it once was. It was kind of like broken S tier, like picked mid, picked all the time in pros. It's still picked a decent amount. It's still played a lot. Its win rate is still decent. It's just not as good as it once was. There's nothing too special to say about this hero other than it just does ridiculous pure damage and is hard to deal with. And if you get like early game, you're just really good, and then if you get farm later in the game, you can just kind of own games with this hero, and it's really hard to stop him in general unless you have like breaks or other things like that to just to like burst the hero down. Then we have Kunkka, another stable hero that was kind of very good at one point and just kind of has been nerfed a little bit over time. Actually, he probably dropped a little bit lower than A tier recently, but then with other things being nerfed, he's risen back to that A tier where it's like, okay, well, this hero's actually pretty good despite some of the numbers being nerfed. His Ags is still really good. He's still very reliable. He can still do all the things he used to do. He's just not as insane and broken like he was, where it's just, you know, you're just stunning people for infinite amounts of time and the team fight is too ridiculous and the cooldowns are too low and all that kind of stuff, but it's still very, very good. Then we have Razor, which is like just the anti-carry of the patch. Like, because there's so many carries, because there's so many, you know, people that just get a lot of farm and just feel hard to deal with, Razor is one to counter those, not only in lane, but in game in general. And he doesn't actually need a lot of farm, but if you do get a lot of farm on this hero, he can actually be insane. So because there's a way to farm on the hero with his passive now, which is a little bit better for farming, and there's more space on the map to farm, and you can kind of max your Q as well to farm, because people are doing that more, it just is one of these things where if you can get the space and the time to get those 4 or 5 items, it becomes very strong. The typical thing was kind of like Slardar, like you wouldn't really farm very fast, but you only needed a couple items anyway. You only needed maybe BKB, maybe one small item, and then like Refresher. Like people were straight up going for Falcon Blade BKB Refresher in other patches, and it worked. But now if you can have that time, have that space, and get that farm, this hero is just very, very powerful. Then we have Primal Beast, who's just generally pretty good. I don't really see him a ton. He's not picked as much as he once was, but he's still a fairly good hero. He's kind of like a discount tanky boy, like a centaur. He just kind of has low cooldown spells, constantly is fighting like a centaur, and then his ult is obviously very, very good and scales pretty well into the late game. He's not as good as the centaur. I think that's kind of how you can compare him in this current patch. And then we have Doom, who is just overall very good ever since they changed the Doom to not allow you to heal, but obviously the downside is you can cast items, which kind of stinks, but there's a lot of heroes these days that are buying Satanic or heroes that are healing, and that's how they kind of keep up their survivability in fights. And so having a Doom just straight up counters a lot of those matchups, a lot of those heroes, and it's really good for that reason. And then also with the Shivas and everything else like that, this hero actually does significant amounts of damage running in with the Shivas and using that Doom, but also with the his just other skills as well, his Infernal Blade and all that kind of stuff. You can actually be a significant damage dealer as well because of the Shivas mainly. I mean, the Shivas is really the thing, honestly, that makes the Centaur good as well, the Primal Beast good. Like, this Shivas build is key for so many of these heroes, Doom included. So that's A tier. Then we can move on to the B tier. We have Omni Knight here. This is kind of more of like a cheese pick in some ways. Like, there are matchups and games where it feels like Omni Knight does absolutely nothing, and then there's other games where it's just, how do you deal with this hero? Because he just jumps in, he deletes your support, he even deletes your cores sometimes. Like, he does ridiculous amounts of pure damage, but it, like I said, really is matchup dependent and really is snowball dependent, because this hero is one of those heroes like the Slardar, like the Razor, that doesn't farm very fast, and he actually doesn't have any way that allows him to farm quickly. Like, these heroes are better now because they have more space, they're able to farm, they have more farming tools like Slardar. He still doesn't have a great farming tool. Like, yes, he has his Purification and an AoE, but that doesn't really clear the wave, and there's no real good way to amp that up. And the items here he's buying are mainly for single target burst damage, so that's kind of the weakness of the hero. But again, if you can snowball the lane, if you can snowball the game and just get that tempo up, you will stomp games, especially in the right matchups. And then Axe is actually pretty popular right now. It's just that he is very straightforward. He's just a typical offlaner, and a lot of these like specialty offlaners are like different offlaners, kind of changing up the role of the offlane in terms of like picking Razor, in terms of picking, you know, DK. Brewmaster's more of a specialty hero in that way, but Axe is just straightforward good. Like, if you're looking for a solid offlaner and you don't want to learn how to play Timber and all this kind of stuff, you can definitely pick Axe. He's very, very good. He's just solid all around. There's nothing crazy to say about him. Like, there's nothing new, nothing ridiculous, but it's just a solid offlaner all around with his BKB piercing stun and all that kind of stuff. And obviously you want to be getting up those stacks with the Culling Blade, but you don't have to all the time. Sometimes it's just enough to have that AoE stun and that BKB piercing stun. Then we have Wind Ranger. This is a little bit of a specialty hero in terms of matchups. Like, you can have games where a Wind Ranger offlane feels absolutely terrible because of just the nature of the lineup. Like, if you have a lot of ranged heroes, if you don't have a lot of heroes that want to go in, like ranged supports, ranged carry, ranged mid, ranged offlane, it just feels like, well, what are we going to do now because we have Wind Ranger offlane? This does absolutely nothing. But there's other games where you have a lot of melee heroes and you can just round out a lineup with the Wind Ranger offlane, and that can be exactly what you need and can absolutely stomp games. And that's kind of similar with Wind Winter Wyvern. These are both like universal heroes that are ranged heroes. They can do well in lane, and if it's in the right style of game, the right draft, it can absolutely stomp. And obviously Winter Wyvern has the things that it does with the teamfight ultimate, with the being kind of an anti-tank hero. Nothing really has changed there. It's just kind of middle of the pack, middle of the road, pretty good. Then we have Magnus, which is basically the opposite of these two, which this hero's all about control. It's all about the team fight. It's really not about doing damage. And so if you have a lot of damage on your team already, you just need somebody to get in there, you know, to reposition people, to catch them out, to stun them through BKB and all that kind of stuff with the ultimate, then Magnus is your guy. But if you need damage, if you're going up against people, you know, enemies that are tanky, but they also farm, and it's like you need more damage because there's not that much farm or damage on your team already because there's another mid that's kind of like a Magnus, it can feel kind of bad because you have a lot of control, but you don't have a lot of damage. You're not bursting people down and that kind of stuff. And then Enigma, surprisingly, is kind of on the upswing. This hero was dead after they changed it recently because I think it was good for years and years. Like literally for years, it felt like it was an A or S tier hero. Then they finally changed it, nerfed it. It felt like it went all the way down to F. And then people kind of realized, oh wait, you know, the Eidolons aren't that bad. Actually, it has some benefits in some situations, and the Black Hole can never be counted out. So it's still decent right now. I would actually personally put it maybe in C tier in terms of like how I feel about the hero. I just don't think it's been proven to be that good. But hey, the win rate and the pick rate is a lot better than it used to be, and it honestly deserves to be in B tier based on that alone. So that's why I'm putting it here. And then Pango is more of like a mid hero these days, but it's definitely solid as an offlane. It's just a little bit riskier. There's nothing too special to say about that I didn't already talk about in the mid lane, in the mid tier list. So if you want to hear more about how Pango has changed, you can go look at that video. But it's just not as good in the offlane. Hasn't really been. It's basically been more of a mid hero recently. Then we have Night Stalker, another kind of middle-of-the-road hero. This is a very matchup-dependent hero, has weaknesses, obviously, in the daytime, which is clear and straightforward, but there are some matchups where it's just like, yeah, your vision is great and everything, but you can't really run in, you can't really hunt supports, they're really kiting you, and it just doesn't feel good, and you can just kind of get bursted down, you can get killed, you can get right-clicked, you can't man-fight people, and so it is matchup-dependent in that way. But otherwise, a pretty solid offlaner, kind of if you're looking for a middle-of-the-road offlaner, does some team fight stuff, some silence AoE, does some damage, has good vision. It's just a generally, you know, well-rounded hero. Then we have Bounty Hunter, is a little bit, again, all in on a certain style of play because this hero is all about like just being super annoying and picking people off. It is a melee hero, but it isn't really a go-in melee hero like a Night Stalker, like an Axe, even like an Omni Knight, because Omni Knight's tanky, can go in and can cast spells and stuff like that, and it's hard to deal with him. Bounty Hunter, on the other hand, doesn't really want you to turn on him and fight him. He wants to be able to chase people down, pick people off, like the supports, like maybe a mid or something like that is just all alone, and he doesn't want to actually be turned on by all the enemy spells. And so, because of that, you need heroes on your team that can go in and can tank the spells and that can kind of distract for you so you can do all the things you want to do in fights. Because if you're picking offlane bounty and you aren't able to just go in and like get in the backlines and stuff and people are just focusing you, you feel like a support and you feel terrible. And honestly, you need to snowball also kind of like an Omni Knight too, because you don't farm very well. You farm heroes and fights, and that's how you win. So I would say it's really, you know, the lower MMR you go in some ways, the easier it can be to do that snowballing, but then the harder it is to catch up if you have a bad game because you're just not farming and everyone else is. Then we have Pudge. I've seen this hero absolutely pop off. I think it is a legitimate offlaner. Like the way this hero works now, I honestly put it in with heroes like Axe, heroes like Night Stalker, heroes almost like Centaur. Like this hero is just a true legitimate offlaner these days, I feel like, because of the items that are in the game and the way he builds. It just feels like he's tanky. He has a good repositioning spell. He has a good stun. He has a little bit of everything you want. He can even initiate with Blink. It just is a well-rounded, solid hero, and his laning stage is actually decent as well. Like, it's not the best, but it used to be terrible, and it's pretty good. Like, you're not just griefing by picking Pudge offlane. Like, you can have decent lanes, and you can even, you know, win lanes and crush lanes if you're really good at hitting hooks from trees and stuff like that. Then we have Spirit Breaker. This hero has been better ever since it's been able to clear through waves and get farm by charging, you know, creep waves and like charging the range creep, and then you just clear through everything. That's still the case, except it's not as good as it once was, which is how it kind of got nerfed and fell off. But I still think it's solid. It's a good all-around hero. It's a little bit specialty, like I wouldn't put it in the same category as an Axe or a Magnus or something like that, or a Night Stalker, but it is all about control. And hey, you do a decent amount of damage, and so if your team needs somebody to just go in, you can pick Spirit Breaker, and that's really good. And then Broodmother is your kind of middle of the road offlaner that's just like a, cheese pick. There's nothing too much to say about that. It's not great right now, but you can definitely pick it and win. You just don't see very much Brood unless it's S tier, and then it's very annoying. It's picked all the time. But right now it's not picked a lot, but you can win with it. Then we have C tier, which first we have Tidehunter, just of like your typical, classic offlaners. This hero's not that great. It's okay. It was better before, but I think the biggest thing is that the anchor is good. That's really what's saving the hero and making it decent. Like the anchor is the best thing about the hero. If it didn't have that, it would just be terrible. I really think that's just how, the long and short of it. And then Legion Commander, I think, is good at low MMRs. It's just the fact is, at higher MMRs, scaling up with this damage and picking people off, that's just not as important, because honestly, if there's a Legion in a game, or any other hero that needs to pick people off, people don't really have to push lanes by committing their hero nearly as much as they used to. You just have a support or a Manta just clearing waves, and then you just go to the jungle because there's so much jungle space that, like, in the past, Legion has just had, a field day with picking people off in the side lanes, and you can still do that for sure, but it's not as guaranteed. And then even if you do get all of that damage, it just doesn't feel as good when everybody's getting so many ways to deal with you, with so many items and all this kind of stuff getting so tanky. It just doesn't feel as good where you're going to snowball out of control and be that unstoppable force later because of how much farm and how late games are going these days. Then we have Marcy. I put Marcy at C tier because I actually think Marcy's more of a carry these days. Because of the way you want to build this hero, you kind of want to build this hero with Battle Fury and then going straight into BKB and then getting other items if you're going to build, you're going to play Marcy, or maybe even support. Offlane, it just feels weird, because what are you really going for? You're not a Shiva's builder. You're not, really building any farming items in the offlane. Like, you're not a Maelstrom builder. It just feels awkward, but you're not building Battle Fury as a Marcy in the offlane. So that's the thing. There's just no good item build in the offlane, but you could get away with it. It's theoretically possible, and it is decent if you can get away with just straight up playing almost carry from the offlane, but it's just not as good as some of these other heroes. Then Abaddon is a little bit of like a cheesy pick too, where you're kind of playing carry almost like a Dragon Knight, like you're just like a discount Dragon Knight in some ways, because you're buying Manta, you're buying almost carry items. You might even buy like Radiance sometimes in the off lane. And so that can be a little bit of a grief, because you're not, although you are somewhat a tanky traditional offlaner, it's not tanky and initiation like a lot of these other, Night Stalker, Axe, Centaur-like heroes. So it can be a bit of a grief because of that. So, if you have other go-in heroes, you have other heroes that can make space and you can get away with it, that's definitely possible. But other times it can feel like, you're just kind of not doing anything. Then we have Wraith King. I still think this hero is viable because you're pushing, you still have an Ags build you can go, you still have a stun, initiation, that kind of stuff. You don't have to go all in for the damage, but you can do damage if you need to, and that's kind of the really how this hero works, especially because carry from the offlane is still a thing. It's just that a lot of these other heroes that are good right now kind of do a lot of damage as well and still have the stuns and the AoE stuns and the, good laning stage and all that kind of stuff. This hero just goes a lot more in on the push early, where a lot of these other heroes don't, maybe like a DK does, obviously, but that's really, it's all about the skeletons, and you are going to sit back and farm for a while too, so that can sometimes be a little bit grief, like the Abaddon. Then we have Bristleback. Overall, I think this hero is decent. It's kind of almost in a way a discount Timbersaw. I actually look at them very similarly because they have strong laning stages once they get to a certain level, and then later in the game, in that mid-game portion, they can be super hard to deal with. Like, you're just dominating the game, taking towers, people can't fight you, and then later in the game, when you get your actual Ags build and stuff like that for Bristleback, you will do a ton of damage. The problem is that the map is so big that even though you're trying to force things, like you're trying to force towers and you're trying to put yourself in a position where they can't deal with you, so a lot of times these days they can just ignore you. Like, this hero is just a lot slower around the map, and you're not really farming all that quick. So the problem is yes, you can get your items, you can get strong, but there's a lot more breaks like Hoodwink and stuff that are popular, and there just isn't going to be those times where you feel like, oh, I have to deal with this Bristleback because he's going to take my towers. People are just kind of like, whatever, we have 50 glyphs and we're just going to jungle, and that's not a big deal, so they just ignore you, and that's kind of the problem. That's similar with Death Prophet, where this hero is kind of a snowball-y hero. This hero is all about tanking. This hero is all about using the ult to take towers in team fights, but a lot of times these days, you press your ult, people can run away, people disengage, people just let you take the tower, whatever. Now, yes, if you go high ground with this ult, it can feel decent, but even so, it's so hard with the glyphs. Like, it doesn't really, they don't care. They just glyph twice, and then it's like, okay, we're still going to fight you at the end of your ult, and that just always feels bad. I think these big, like, high cooldown ultimate heroes just aren't good right now, like Tide, like Death Prophet. Enigma's okay, but still, I don't really think, even though the win rate and the, pick rate's up there, I still think it's not that great right now. Then we have Viper. Viper offlane is just a little bit too slow, It just doesn't, you know, move around the map or gank or do anything that you want it to do in that way. And you're not really going to go Boots of Travel because that's a bit of a grief. Like you could go Boots of Travel from the mid Viper, but not really from the offlane Viper. And yes, you can dominate lanes, but people are just going to go jungle these days. You know, when people are picking Lunas and people are picking Gyros and all this stuff that can just go jungle, like, does it really matter if you dominate the early part of the lane? Because they're going to recover in the jungle almost certainly. Then Dawnbreaker, I think this is just a middle of the road, like average offlane hero. It's just not as good as a lot of these other ones. Like there's nothing special to say about it. The build is just a little bit weird. Like, are you going Echo Saber? Is that the build? Like, are you going to get Ags eventually? I think that's one of the biggest things sometimes with heroes like this, where it's like they don't really have a good build that fits into the meta. So it just feels awkward no matter what you buy. And then that's what makes it C tier. I think that's the problem with Dawnbreaker. Then I actually put Alchemist here because it seems like a little bit of a weird pick, but this is obviously all in on the farming and all in on the 3 like carries kind of strat, where hopefully you have a mid lane that's like a little bit less of a carry, more of like a playmaker, which is usually happening this map or this patch anyway, and can make space on the map. But, you know, maybe you even have the same kind of thing. Maybe they picked a Razor carry for some reason on your team, and so then you're like, okay, well, I can get away with this because it's just the matchup is good in my lane or whatever. I see the supports, those are pretty good matchups, and I think based on my cores, I can actually play this hero off lane and not be grief. But keep in mind, it is all in and it can be grief. And then Visage is just kind of bottom of the rung hero for being a cheese pick right now. Then lastly, for viable heroes, we have D tier. We have Beastmaster and Lycan. These are just the Zoo heroes. Zoo's not really good right now. They did buff it recently, but it's still not great. I do think like Lycan has a suspiciously high win rate and at some MMRs, but his pick rate's very low. You just never see the hero really, so that's why I'm putting it down here, because I think if it was picked like at all, it would just, you would see that it's not very good. Just the Helm of the Overlord is not great right now. It's just not a Zoo meta, because it's all about tempo a lot of times with these heroes. Then we have Necro, not good against like any of the good heroes right now, like, you know, your Zeus's, your magic damage dealers. I kind of already said that in the mid tier list, but the same thing is true in the offlane. You don't want your like tanky go-in offlaner, which is Necro, even though he doesn't buy Blink. You usually want a front line with this hero, but when he can just be bursted down by the mid laner like super easily, that never feels good. Then Venomancer is just like, you can pick it in some matchups. It's all about like the enemy team composition, and then your team, that you have enough people that you don't feel like this Veno pick is going to be a grief. Like, do you have a good melee 4 position that can kind of go in? Is your mid kind of a go in tanky melee 4 position? All you really need to do is be super annoying. It's almost like, I feel like a bounty hunter in that way, where you just have this weird like, not, I mean, this is damage over time where Bounty's a little bit more bursty, but it's just like you want to be able to annoy people to death. And that's kind of what Bounty does. It's kind of what Veno does, but you can only do that with the right lineup against the right lineup. And Veno is just a worse version of that all around. Tusk, just a bad offlaner right now, just not great overall, because his lane is just not good. He doesn't do that like insane farm burst damage like he used to. And, you know, the build is also a little bit weird. Are you going Blink? Are you going Ags? Like, what are you really doing from the off lane? It just feels better as a support because, I mean, its laning stage is okay. It can farm pretty decent with 2 of its spells, but, like, you still are wasting a lot of mana with 2 spells to clear a wave, and then you're not jungling well. And like I said, are you buying Ags first? Are you buying Blink? Because a lot of these, like, Blink first heroes, like, even, you know, Slardar, Centaur, these guys are not buying Blink first, and this guy does not buy Shivas. So it's another one of those, the build is just awkward, and what are you actually going to do, and is it going to end up being, you know, favorable for you when you go these items? Sand King, just overall, this hero's in the dumpster right now. It's a great hero, it's cool, it's fun, but Dust, ever since that change, it's just been terrible. There was one patch where it was good, and then they nerfed it into the ground, and it's still bad. So it just, unless they change something about the hero, make it a little bit better, buff the numbers, it's just going to be bad forever, because Dust is so much better against this hero in general now. Then Earthshaker's been bad ever since they kind of made the Ags build worse. It's still viable. You can still potentially play it. Again, it's one of those that the matchup has to be right, but it's just the numbers are way worse now, so it doesn't feel like you're just jumping in with your totem and just deleting people. Then Weaver, this is kind of like, I would rather just play Alchemist if I was going to go carry from the offlane, or even like Wraith King, because this hero has no stun. So yeah, you can put bugs on people, you can like get in and out of the fight, but this is almost like, I just put this here because it's been picked sometimes. This is almost like picking Slark or Ursa offlane, which honestly, of all the patches of all the times where that's viable, I think this is a patch that it's viable. The difference is that this hero just has a way better laning stage, so that's kind of why it's in this list, which you could even argue I should take it off. Then Venge, just more of a support. It just feels weird when you have this Venge off lane, and there's definitely matchups where it can work, but like, again, you're not farming very quickly. It just feels like you're going all in, sacrificing yourself. Yeah, you have this Ags, but then like, who cares? You can probably farm that Ags almost as fast these days from the 4 position. And then Chaos Knight, surprisingly, this hero's like coming back into the meta, even though the numbers on its lifesteal got nerfed so much, because they've kind of buffed the other abilities. It's not really about the lifesteal anymore, but that is a huge thing because the damage and the ability to like, you know, heal in lane and even heal by farming creeps, you can't do that as much anymore compared to like 6 months ago when it was really, really good. But now it's like, it's getting to the point where those other spells like the stun and the reality rift is just getting to the point where the positioning is almost like, not Magnus tier of course, but it's like getting there. It's kind of getting insane. So I think it's on the upswing. If we see some more buffs in that area, this hero almost could be a support, a 4 position in some ways, but it's still semi-viable as an offlane. Then lastly, we have F tier. F tier, we have Lone Druid, absolutely dumpstered recently in the patch, just a terrible hero right now. Phoenix, not a great offlaner. I've seen it work sometimes as a mid or an offlane, but just I would not pick it as an offlaner. Bat Rider, just more of a support all around these days. Underlord is just the worst of your like typical, like I said, Axe, Night Stalker, you know, Tide. Underlord just has not seen any love. I know they try to do things with it. I really like when they changed the ultimate recently, but it's just not a good hero right now. Nature's Prophet, just more of a support. I hate to say it. It kind of sucks because that support version of the hero is just annoying and everyone hates it. Even people that play it probably don't really like it. I can't believe anyone likes this hero being a support. But right now it's just not a core. This hero is a good support. It's actually one of the best supports right now, but it just feels horrible to have this hero as a core. Like an offlane Nyx, like, no thank you. No farming potential, all about the pickoff, which you can do from the support position. And then same thing with Snapfire, just a better support right now. That right-click build is just not a thing. I mean, technically, I think you could still go it, but then you're just like banking on getting all the way to level 25, which is just weird. I mean, like, you know, there's a lot of heroes that are really good at 25, like Viper, but if you're just banking on that, even though games do go late, that's just not something you want to do. So that is my offlane tier list for patch 7.35d. As always, guys, if you like the video, like, comment, subscribe, all of those kinds of things. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.